Hello students, and welcome back to the Lore of the Iron Kingdoms with me, Professor Caster. And as we mentioned before, today we are going to be going over the warjacks of the Protectorate of Menoth. And we're going to be starting with their light jacks, because, well, we usually always start with light jacks. We'll be going over all of their lore, all of their stats, and then we'll be going over any of the Mark 3 to Mark 4 changes as per usual. And also, while we're here, thank you guys so much for showing up to class. And if you could, please hit that like button. Please subscribe. Please share any of this content with your friends and fellow gamers that might be interested to help grow our channel and keep the Steam train rolling. And as always, thank you so much, privateerpress, for letting us read your fantastic lore on the channel. And without further ado, let's begin. Dervish, a work of divine inspiration. The Dervish uses the unparalleled reflexes of its Devout chassis wholly for offense. Instead of protecting, every motion of its warjack is meant to end life. The warjack falls upon the enemies of the faithful like the iron-forged butcher, its twin blades working in tandem to sow death across the battlefield. The Dervish has marked its success with the wake of a shorn limb or fallen soldier since the day it emerged from the hidden foundries, becoming notorious for its death-dealing capabilities during the vicious fighting between the Protectorate and Signarin forces on the streets of Seoul. The light and agile Dervish is the perfect addition to the crusading army on the move. It possesses greater reflexes than the other Protectorate warjacks developed to date, and is constructed to have supreme flexibility. Bringing its blades to bear at blinding speeds, the Dervish weaves through battle, sidestepping attacks in the same motion it uses to dispatch enemies in its path. The killing machine of the First Order was obviously designed solely for war, unable to justify the existence of the machine as part of any of Protectorate's defensive forces. The Synod decreed the Dervish would be constructed in secret and only in small numbers. Now, in the days of the Crusade, these warjacks have been called to the front lines to carve a bloody swath through the Protectorate's enemies. And this thing is pokey. And, you know, it's kind of hard to justify that this guy is a warjack, which is probably why it was made in secret. Like we read in the previous, they usually hit a lot of these more offensive jacks in the dark. So that's where it is. Let's go over his stats, just because I love reading these, because warjacks are all kind of done up the same, unlike War Beast. Its initial service state was 595 AR. Its height is 8 feet 7 inches. Its weight is 3.5 tons. Its fuel load is 365 pounds. Its general use is up to 7 hours, and its combat use is 80 minutes. And that would make sense, since this thing, when it goes into combat, it is just a flurry of strikes and stabs and people missing parts they probably should have had to begin with. Its armaments are swords. That's all it uses. And its Cortax manufacturers are the vassals of Menoth. So, yeah, this guy is a pretty pokey, and he's a light warjack, so he's pretty quick as well. But let's go over his Mark 3 to Mark 4 changes and see if anything changed. Most likely not, because I have not been seeing a whole huge sloth of changes in warjacks from Mark 3 to Mark 4, just because if it's not broke, you can't fix it, right? And as always, let's start with his stat line. He has a speed of 5. He has a mat of 7, so he's a very melee combatant. He has a defense 13, armor 16. One of the fun things about him is he has a breakthrough, so he can run past models without having to lose his combat action, as is the new Mark 4 setup. He is able to trample. He is able to headbutt. He is a construct as per usual. His abilities include sidestep, which is the same as the original. And he had parry on his original too, so that's why he has breakthrough now. So sidestep. When this model hits an enemy model with its initial melee attack or melee special attack, it can advance up to 2 inches after the attack is resolved. And for warjacks and warcasters, this is a very dangerous thing, because every time they hit an enemy, they're able to move 2 inches. So, and it's initial, so if they have 2 weapons, they can move twice, so they can get up to 4 inches, so they can get themselves all moved into a better position to stab a bunch of more people if they use focus to make additional attacks. And this guy's weapon output is his double swords. Both of his swords have a mat 7, range 1, POW 13. And he has combo strike, which is different from Mark 3, because in Mark 3 you would take the you would take the power of both weapons and add it to its strength. They did away with that. It's confusing math. Combo strike now just gives you a base of +4 damage. So this guy can make 2 attacks at power 13 or 1 attack at 17, which for a light jack, being able to dish out a 17 power attack and be able to just, you know, make additional attacks at 13 power is still pretty significant, especially with some of the abilities the warcasters and some of the solos can toss on the warjacks. Makes these guys cheap but very, very effective at especially removing infantry models. But yeah, always be wary of these guys. And I'm usually pretty wary of most small Menoth warjacks because they usually always got a lot of punch in for their size. So yeah, but let's move on. Devout. Faith alone is not always sufficient to shield the righteous from their enemies. And so the Devout was crafted to guard the Protectorate's leaders from heretics. Every component lends to the Devout's ability to protect its master. It is light enough to keep up with the fleet-footed warcasters, and it uses the enhanced mechanical reflexes to intercept attacks or bring weapons to bear against the foe drawing too close to its ward. Its massive shield is sanctified with holy inscriptions from the canon of the true law to protect its controllers from the accursed magic of heathen sorcerers. When the vassals of Menoth were commanded by the Synod to produce a warjack capable of guarding a warcaster, they wasted no time in applying their considerable expertise to the task. After rejecting the workhorse Repenter's chassis as too cumbersome, they chose instead to design the Devout from the ground up to ensure its suitability to its vital purpose. Though the Devout prototype still made extensive use of the smuggled components, its cortex was developed entirely within the Protectorate. More advanced than older counterparts, this cortex allowed the Devout to develop a whip-like reflex and a watchful intensity, which together with its heavy shield make it the perfect bodyguard. Like a faithful hound, its every reaction is tuned to the flow of battle as it positions itself between the warcasters and those who would strike him. And again, like a lot of light warjacks of the Menoth, he is pretty quick and pretty good to have around any warcaster, and he's not all that expensive, so you want to have at least one of him if you have a more squishy warcaster. But let's read his stats as well. His initial service date is 579 AR. His height is 8 foot 7 inches. His weight is 3.9 tons. His fuel load is 387 pounds. His general use is 7 hours. His combat use 75 minutes. And I imagine 75 minutes because his watchful gaze is very on all the time, so he's probably very protective of his particular warcaster. His armaments include a polearm and his great shield, and his cortex was manufactured by the vassals of Menoth, and he's currently being manufactured right now, so that's always exciting. But let's read over his Mark 3 to Mark 4 changes and see if anything has changed. I am guessing probably not. And let's start with his stats as always. He is a speed 5, mat 7, defense 13, armor 16. And what he has is he has the ability to trample, he has the ability to headbutt, and his special abilities include defensive strike. Same as Mark 3. Once per turn, when an enemy model advances and ends its movement or is placed in this model's melee range, this model can immediately make one basic melee attack against it, which is something I've seen a lot of in the Protectorate army as of recent. So very dangerous ability that is, to strike first before anybody even has the chance to stab you. So, but it can only be used once, thank goodness. So if you get a whole unit in there, and they're not going to be just wiped like that. His second ability he has is Shield Guard, and that's the same as a Mark 3. So when a friendly model is directly hit by a non-spray range attack while within 3 inches of this model with Shield Guard, you can choose to have this model be directly hit instead. That model is automatically hit and suffers all damage and effects. The model can use Shield Guard only once per round. It cannot use Shield Guard if it is incorporeal, knockdown, or stationary. Shield Guard can only be used once per attack. Now, the special rules we have to take into account here is it has to be directly hit. So if somebody shoots your warcaster or whoever you're trying to protect and it misses with like an AoE, this model cannot intercept a missed AoE attack, unfortunately. Also, it's a non-spray attack. It has to be an actual gun. So there we go. One of the spells that this guy actually got removed is Spell Barrier. So no longer in Mark IV. Spellberry, what that did was while the model was base to base, with its battle group controller, the battle group controller cannot be targeted by enemy spells. I imagine they just took that off because it's way broken. So yeah, being able to protect from spell, given basically spell word is a very dangerous spell anyway, because well, very protective. But that's how it works. Balance and flow make it a little bit easier to play. His weapons include his shield, which gives him a +2 to his armor as long as he has his left arm. His shield is also a weapon, thank goodness. I noticed in Mark IV, most models that have shields now can also use their shield as a weapon, so it gives them an additional melee attack, which is phenomenal for solos and units, because then it really puts out their damage input by quite a bit, so always useful to have. His shield is a Mat 7 range 1 POW 11, and his polearm is a Mat 7 range 2 POW 13. No special abilities on the polearm. It is just a pokey stick. So, but 13 is nothing to be looked at. So, if he has a solo run up on him trying to kill him off, which I don't know why any solo would want to run up and try to kill off a warjack, but that happens. This guy can poke him with a nice little 13 and most likely tear asunder whoever they're poking with it. All in all, a very useful jack at a cost of 8 points. You can squeeze at least one of him in as a protection notice for your warcaster, so always useful to have. But let's move on. Purifier. Crafted as a literal interpretation of the most wrathful passages in the canon of the True Law, the Purifier possesses a singular device to eradicate unbelief through the cleansing fires of the Creator. In battle, the jack rushes enemy formations with startling speed, brutally whipping its flails through the opposition in comets of ash and flame that streak around the machine's form as it darts and dives. Wherever blows from this weapon land, the air fills with a sharp crack of bone and a tortured scream of men as the force of impact drives their charred and broken bodies into the earth beneath them. A trail of flaming footprints marks the Purifier's passing, and any opponents it encounters that were not crushed under the weight of its flails soon meet an even less merciful death. Roaring fire conjured by the holy passage inscribed upon the chassis of the Purifier carry out its duty, quickly devouring one unbeliever after another in the feast of sizzling flesh. The uncompromising ferocity of the machine and the hunger in which it applies its flame have made even faithful Menites afraid to witness the passage of these warjacks, lest their wrath spill over to ignite those of inadequate faith. And I feel like anytime you get the name Purifier on any type of Menoth warjacks is a terrifying proposition, because purity usually equals flame somewhere in the Protectorate. Oof, don't want to be hit with one of these flails. Let's read over his little stat line here. His initial service date is 599 AR. His height is 8 foot 7 inches, weight 3.9 tons, fuel load 390 pounds, general use 7 hours, combat use 75 minutes, and his armaments include immolators. Oof, terrifying. And his cortex was manufactured by the vassals of Menoth. But let's read over his Mark III to Mark IV changes and see how much more terrifying this flame slamming warjack seems to be. And as always, we will start with his stat line. And his stat line includes a speed of 5, a mat of 7, a defense of 13, armor 16, as per usual with these warjacks it seems. His special abilities includes Trample. He has immunity to fire, which makes sense. He can headbutt. And his special abilities include Ashen Veil, which is same as a Mark III. This model has concealment, and living enemy models without resistance to fire suffer a -2 to attack rolls while they're within 2 of this model. So not only does he crank his defense up to a 15 from far away, but if somebody's trying to hit him in melee without immunity to fire, he still has a defense of 15, which makes this guy very, very dodgy. He still has his flame trail. So when this model advances into base-to-base contact with an enemy model during its activation, the enemy model suffers the fire continuous effect, which is basically the same thing it was in Mark III. And then he still has overtake. So when this model destroys one or more enemies with a basic melee attack during its combat action after the attack is resolved, he can immediately advance up to 1 inch, which this does not say initial attacks. This just says every time he kills somebody, he moves 1 inch, which is an awful proposition when you add on things like Flame Trail, because Flame Trail just says when it advances base-to-base contact, anytime during its activation, that model suffers fire, so he can kick on fire every time that he moves around with Overtake. Which, yeah, especially with the any of the warcasters who have the ability to throw around fire or, you know, change opponents who are on fire, this guy will just light up an entire unit if he didn't kill them outright. So, yeah. His weapons, now that we're on that, have a continuous fire effect, and they're chain weapons, so they ignore shields for armor bonus purposes. He has a Mat 7, Range 1, and POW 13, and he has 2 of these things. So, yeah, pretty decent if you're trying to catch everybody on fire, especially if you have anything that makes fire more damaging. Because I know some warcasters have abilities to make fire a little bit more dangerous for the opponents. This guy would be a staple for catching lots of people on fire if you don't want to have to use a flamethrower. But we will see some warjacks that have flamethrowers, rest assured. His cost is only 8, so it's still a relatively cheap jack. And being able to get additional fire on people is always useful. But let's move on to something a little less frightening, or more frightening. We'll find out. Redeemer. Armed with numerous devastating long-range rockets, the Redeemer was designed to deliver judgment from afar. This warjack carries an ample supply of Protectorate manufactured explosives and a mechanical rig to launch them. Borrowing technology developed for the Repenter's ignition system, the Redeemer uses vented heartfire to light the propellants. The simple rockets are launched in great number into the enemy ranks to explode in a cascade of deadly debris that leaves survivors with horrible lacerations and extensive burns that are notoriously difficult to heal. The Redeemer can deliver devastating salvos of rocket fire, though the inaccuracies of its weapon usually spreads the projectiles across a wide area. It wields a brutal mace for close fighting. In the earliest decades after the production, the Redeemer was instrumental in expanding the borders of the Protectorate into the east and south. It was often employed against the rugged and determined bands of Idrian holdouts who refused to convert. Since that time, the warjack has been more actively turned against Signar and other enemies of the Protectorate. Deploying to support both border defenses and active assaults abroad, many Signarans still wait hopeful for long-lost kin, not knowing their bodies lie unrecognizable in the battlefields, torn apart by the Redeemer's fire. And the Redeemer, the original rockets from the Repenters, were incredibly inaccurate, and back in the day in Mark III, having your AoE not sure where exactly it's going to land caused all sorts of chaos all over the battlefield, which in certain aspects was kind of funny if you're, you know, not involved in those battles, because you never know where they're going to land, because even if they shoot at somebody they think they're going to hit, it's just going to go wildly off. So, or it might hit directly. You never know. That's what creates the Repenter's rockets on the Redeemer. As a fun little side note, definitely not a sniper rifle by any means. But let's read his stats. He is a height of 9 feet 10 inches. His initial service date was a 5.45 AR. His weight is 4.85 tons. His general use, or his fuel load, is 385 pounds. His general use is 5.5 hours. And his combat use, 75 minutes. And he has the Skyhammer rocket pod and a battle mace. And his Cortex is manufactured by the vassals of Menoth. Let's read over his stat line and see what interesting things the Redeemer has that they fixed. Maybe they made him more accurate. Maybe they actually got like the Codorn aiming system and it got better after they, took over parts of Lail and they got some of the newer upgrades. But let's find out. And I'm pretty sure they probably got better upgrades, because in Mark IV, since AoEs are no longer a thing, having inaccurate rockets probably is not a thing anymore. But let's find out. We're going to start with his stat line. He's a speed 5. He is a mat 6. He is a rat 4, so pretty abysmal rat. Defense 12, armor 17. He has trample, he has headbutt, he has dual attack, so he can make both his range attack and melee attacks in the same activation. He doesn't really have any abilities because he is pretty much a straight up gun platform. And yes, as I mentioned, we're going to start with the Skyhammer weapon. And this weapon's pretty devastating on range. It is still a rat 4. It is a range 16, rate of fire 1. AoE 2, so he can hit 2 models within 2 inches. It's a POW 12 6 weapon, so it's not craziest. Looks like they did remove inaccurate, as I mentioned, so we don't have to worry about those things flying wide. So he no longer gets a -4 to its attack rolls. But they did add a additional ability called Reload, which makes him even more fun. This model can spend focus or fury points to make up to 2 additional range attacks with this weapon during its combat action, and it can make 1 additional attack for each focus or fury spent. So he can shoot up to 3 times now at a range of 16, and at rad of 4 he's not going to hit much, but even then, if you're just trying to take out low armored solos with even missed attacks, it's still a very, very useful weapon. And 3 range attacks is insane for anything that's not a large jack. So yeah, you want to have this guy in your army if you're just trying to shoot a bunch of guys or clear a bunch of enemies off the back lines. So his melee weapon includes a battle mace, a Mat 6 range 1 POW 13, which I always find it kind of funny, since this guy is like more of a range guy, that he has a higher mat than he does a rat. Very funny to me. But at a POW 13, he's still swinging some pretty decent damage in melee. He does not have the ability to shoot outside of melee, unfortunately, but of course the rockets being, no longer being inaccurate are still a huge bonus to this guy. So you want to keep him back if you can keep him back, and just rain death from above however you want to with the Redeemer. So very, very dangerous. I'm glad he got a huge improvement from his original. A little less, comical with the scattering of shots, but that's how it goes in Mark IV. That's all we're going to read about today. Next week, or next time we read about the warjacks of the Protectorate of Menoth, we are going to finish off the last of the light jacks that we have. Then we will move on to the heavy warjacks. We'll clear up all those guys, and then we'll move on to the character warjacks as per usual. If you guys are still here, thank you guys so much for listening to our video. If you could, please like, comment, subscribe. Comments really help us move in this direction. Keep us knowing what you guys are actually looking for, and lets us know if we have some videos that we want to do in the future. Also, please share this content around. It does help the channel grow, so more people know about it. Knows we can keep going. Also, as per usual as well, thank you, privateerpress, for letting us continue reading your fantastic lore. And as always, class dismissed.